Happy Monday, family. So wonderful to have you back to Parent Power Hour. This Monday, this is the last, Brother Tyrone, of our summer edition. What a appropriate guest and way to end our summer series than with the renowned nationally and internationally, Mr. Lawrence Brown, here to talk about his seminal work, The Black Butterfly. So happy to have him here. We're going to get to our esteemed guests in a moment. But family, please tune in as always. We got the face of the franchise with us, Mr. Tyrone Barnwell. As always, looks like he's out in, I don't know where he was. He was just in the beach. Now he's moved to location. But that's wonderful. That is wonderful. But it is really wonderful to have all of you all back here. We know that there is much concern going into the school year, but we also always have to keep in mind the things that affect us, not just here in Baltimore, but in all of the urban areas of disenfranchisement where schooling and civil and equal rights are concerned. But before we get into any and all of that, we're going to do our connection questions. So family, you all can chime in, put it into the text as well. Hit up the brother Tyrone as he continues to let you all into our conversation today. Your favorite pastime. What is your favorite pastime? I will start first, and our esteemed guest will go second, and then, of course, Brother Tyrone will go last. So for me, right now, I always talk about my location is the beach. Right now, it's reading. Right now, I'm really in the groove. I got back to reading, actually, when we were away from schools and buildings and office spaces, which is one of my favorite pastimes. I'm really back into that zone. Again, the seminal work that we have a discussion about today, I'm excited about. Mr. Brown, how about you, sir? What's your favorite pastime?
Oh man, it's probably a cross between playing a couple of video games on my Nintendo Switch. Like I love Mario Golf. I've been having a great time whooping cats on Mario Golf. And my other one has been Legos, putting Legos together. Star Wars sets I like a lot, and they have a big map of the globe. I've been working on that, so definitely enjoying working on Legos as well.
All right, beautiful. Thank you for that. You sound like a person after my children's own heart, and unless you know that those kind of games are a lifetime. It doesn't have to stop when you are a certain age if you can get enjoyment out of them. Brother Tyrone, what you got for us, brother?
For me, honestly, listening to music. Music is definitely pastime, the best time used at all times.
Okay, we got a couple bars out of you too there, my brother. So wonderful, wonderful. But we are joined again with Mr. Lawrence Brown. Mr. Brown, we do thank you so much for your time. And as I said at the top of the show, this is a seminal work. And I'm sure, in my humble opinion, that in the pantheon of literature that will help to deconstruct and continue to desegregate in truth our communities and other marginalized communities, the Black Butterfly, when we look back at it, will be in one of those, certainly one of those mentioned, should be one of those mentioned. And before we get into any of that, tell us what brought you to the point of writing this book.
Well, the uprising of April 27, 2015, I think was pretty pivotal, when Freddie Gray, he was murdered by the Baltimore Police Department. And, a lot of the anger and frustration really exploded that day. And I think my scholarship probably was already in tune because the Black Lives Matter movement was already underway because Mike Brown and Ferguson had been killed there. You had later that summer, you had children being attacked by police, like at Fairfield, Ohio, at swimming pool. In McKinney, Texas, again, black children at a swimming pool. Later, that you had kids being pulled by the desk down in South Carolina. Young black girl, Sandra Bland. Her death was around that time. So I think it's just really, for me, it was about how do I talk about the way that we can't make Black lives matter if we don't make Black neighborhoods matter. And that was the main thing I was getting about. So I was Facebook, I was on Facebook talking about it a lot. I was on Twitter talking about it a lot. And the editor at Johns Hopkins University Press, he reached out to me, I think around by 2016, the next year, because I was just, I was going pretty hard. And he was like, you're talking about a lot of solutions, so why don't you write a book about it? And I was like, wow, that's actually quite a pitch. Like I hadn't thought about putting all of that together. I had a book idea, but I hadn't quite thought about doing it like, let's make a book that really talks about solutions for Baltimore City. I'm always tweeting about it, but what would it look like if I put it into a book? So I think just taking him up on his offer, accepting the challenge, and then by January 2017, I was signing a contract and started writing after that.
Wow, thank you. And you mentioned Baltimore, of course. Give our viewership, some biography. This is a local situation, and as Tyrone and I have had the pleasure of having people on from different urban areas, not just urban areas, but different areas throughout the country where Black and brown people are, we see that there are systematic problems that are, within the spectrum of any you call any urban area by name out, you'll see that pretty much those issues are the same. But give our audience an idea about Baltimore, you being local, and all of those things, a little bit of your bio.
Well, I'm originally from West Memphis, Arkansas. And so I am from, more of the deep South, mid South. And my family moved to Texas outside of Houston when I was like 7 years old. So I grew up down in League City, Texas, went to high school there, graduated. Then I went to Morehouse College starting in 1997, earned a degree there in African American Studies in 2001. And, I got to thinking about, I learned all this history in different disciplines, psychology, sociology. What role does government play, especially when it comes to like Black neighborhoods being displaced? Because I saw that. I was at Morehouse, and across the street, there was a public housing community called Harris Homes, and they were being impacted by a Clinton policy called Hope 6, which demolished a lot of public housing units. So I was just very interested, like, how does government really do all of that where you could just uproot and displace a whole group of people like that? So I went to the University of Houston, got my master's in public administration so I could learn about, how urban and public affairs really take place. And then when I wrapped that up, I was thinking, well, let me do, how does this all connect with health? And so I thought about that, and I looked at a couple of programs and ended up going to the University of Tennessee Health Science Center to work on my doctorate degree there. And so I finished in 2011, but as I was finishing, I had a chance to sort of apply for a postdoctoral fellowship at Morgan State in Baltimore. And so I applied and came up here, interviewed, and it was crazy because I saw they drove us around. So we were able to see like the Guilford, Homeland community, and then, like the community next to Hopkins. It's just seeing like the wide disparity, it's just like that, you can go from one community to another and see that. So I was intrigued and it was a good fit. So I came to Baltimore in 2010 as I was wrapping up my degree and started grinding at Morgan State as a postdoc, and then as an assistant professor, and then as an associate professor. And when I got to Baltimore, I was working with two organizations, Union Baptist Head Start on the west side, and then the Men's and Family Center on the east side. So I had a chance to kind of see like what was happening on the east and west sides of town. And I would see beautiful things like, men, lots of men bringing their children to the Head Start like every day. And I'm like, this is actually against the stereotype that black fathers aren't involved, black men aren't involved. I'm seeing like loads of men every day bringing their kids, picking them up, uncles and grandfathers and fathers. And it was just the most beautiful thing, seeing that. And it was cool because I was like, I'm not going to watch The Wire until, I'm here in the city and I actually get to know people first. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made because I wasn't learning Baltimore through that TV show, as great as it is. I was learning Baltimore through the beauty and the resilience of the city, and I think that's really what shaped my work and scholarship, down the line.
Wow, thank you for that. And I'm tempted to go off book here, Dr. Brown, because I want to know, prior to getting to Baltimore, I'm not very familiar. I want to assume, forgive me, that those are more rural areas that you mentioned prior to you coming to Baltimore. Did you see, when you came to Baltimore, were you surprised, or was it kind of like, oh, this is just, racial disparity, urban 101 versus racial disparity, rural 101?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my hometown is West Memphis, Arkansas, so that's definitely much smaller, much more. Really, Arkansas is a very rural state. But across the bridge is Memphis, Tennessee, and then I went to Atlanta to get my bachelor's at Morehouse. So I did see, in those cities, predominantly black, majority black at the time for Atlanta. I don't think it's a chocolate city anymore. But, I did see again, huge disparities. And in Atlanta, like I said, people being uprooted left and right, Hope 6, public housing demolition, and residents being dispersed. So I got to Baltimore, and on the east side, it was EBDI. It was Johns Hopkins that had uprooted like 730 plus African-American families, and they're dispersed. They're spread all over the place. So I came in on the back end of that, and, people like Donald Gresham, Lucille Gorham, they were just teaching me and showing me and telling me their story. This is what happened to us. This is how we got pushed out. And, to see them still fighting and to learn the history, that's really, and I remember coming to Baltimore and seeing in East Baltimore, like these whole blocks that were empty, vacant, like boarded up. And that blew me away. That definitely, this is like in America, the richest country in the world, you got whole blocks that are vacant, boarded up in the middle of an American city. Like as much as I had seen in Memphis, in Atlanta, in Houston, like seeing that here in Baltimore, that blew my mind.
And so, I mean, after seeing that and ultimately writing about that, I mean, what's your take on the state of segregation? It's so funny that we say this word. It's not funny, but we say this word, and a lot of us think about 1950, 1960, 1970, maybe even 1980. But collectively, it doesn't feel like we still think about segregation as being very real today. How do you address those kind of themes in Black Butterfly?
Yeah, I mean, what I would come to learn, because I was trying to figure that out, even though I saw The Wire was showing like all of these pathologies, but well, how did this happen? What made Baltimore end up in the condition that it's in? And so I was doing a lot of research and started looking at racial segregation, and that became a big component. But then I found out, well, Baltimore is the home of urban apartheid in America. Like Baltimore City, on December 19th, 1910, the mayor, John Barry Mahul, passed the first racial zoning ordinance in American history, residential racial zoning ordinance in American history. So, and Baltimore was like this upper South city. And with the Great Migration, you had a lot of African Americans beginning to move up out of the Deep South. And so a city like Baltimore, which was majority white until the mid-70s, like many others, he was like, well, what do we do with what then were called Negroes or color? What do we do with all these colorful? What do we do with all these Negroes? So racial segregation was an attempt, Baltimore's attempt, to basically quarantine these black people that are coming into the cities. And I use the word quarantine intentionally because there are also diseases like tuberculosis, yellow fever, cholera, that were more prevalent at that point in time. So it really, public health really was a part of the discussion they were having. Literally, how do we quarantine these Negroes that have a greater incidence and prevalence of these diseases? Although it became, even then, they understood, well, the reason why is because of the conditions in which they live. The alley houses, not having plumbing, the sewer system wasn't developed yet, so it was unsanitary. The streets weren't paved yet, so if you had runoff going into the alley and it wasn't paved, it just sit there. There was no sewer system to handle it, so that's how you had these communicable diseases just bouncing around like crazy. So, and it was the conditions in which they lived. So it was that sort of understanding, like, wait a minute, Baltimore is ground zero for urban apartheid in America. Oh, now it makes sense. This is the explanation. Baltimore is the pioneer for government enforced racial segregation. And really, I think a lot of people, they look at segregation and they say, well, it's just black and white people not living together. But no. The damage of racial segregation is economics, because racial segregation results in the hyper allocation of resources to white neighborhoods and the hyper deprivation of resources to black neighborhoods. That's the damage of racial segregation. These communities are getting way more money and capital. These communities hardly ever get it. And that's where the problem really lies.
Which, that immediately jettisons separate but equal. We know it's separate and unequal, and the myth that segregation and racial disparities don't take place in the North. And as we know, it's historically true, and it continues to be true. I'm gonna pause for a minute. Dr. Brown, thank you so much. Brother Tyrone, how is our feedback going with our family? Are they chiming in? Is there questions?
Folks are definitely listening. Rebecca just put in the comment section for those who was asking about Mr. Brown here, and that he wrote the book Black Butterfly, letting know it's a great book. And the discussion guide that he shared before the show, for anyone who wants to read, is right there. I'm actually pinning the comment now, so you all can get it right there from the bottom of the screen. Please share the live, and thank you for those who are here. I apologize for not saying that. Y'all definitely share the live and post any comments or questions right here in the chat, and we will get to. I'm maneuvering through the other groups that we're in now, so you can go back to him, and I will put up a finger.
Appreciate it. We are in, we're sitting in class right now, Brother Tyrone. We have these moments on the show where we're blessed, and Dr. Brown is taking us through from the past to present here, history, trying to give us some information and insight on how segregation continues to affect society, especially those of African descent here in Baltimore. So you mentioned white flight. Can you define that once more, and then tell us the impact of white flights, especially when it has to do with schooling and education?
Before we get to that, I want to share this real quickly. Here's the New York Times article from the New York Times Magazine, December 25th, 1910, and they're talking about what happened on December 19th, the week previous. And so this is the man in the middle, Mayor John Barry Mahul. He signed the first residential racial zoning ordinance in American history in Baltimore. And there's the city council member who pushed the ordinance, Councilman Samuel L. West. And it was that black man right there, George McMecken, if you know about McMecken Street out west. This brother moved into 1834 McCullough Street. And there's the house. And it shows, these broken windows because the white community responded with violence and terror and intimidation, breaking his glass, throwing bricks through the skylight at the top of his house. Him and his wife, Anna, and their two children they were trying to move them out. And so like this is, a fascinating article worth reading and picking up. And they get to the point of your question around white flight in this article a bit, because what they're saying is if black people move in, white people move out. And so that's the notion, and it was all based around real estate values. That was the argument, that if black people move in, it's going to depreciate the values of the home. And what really makes white flight germane, and really where it kicks off, is after Brown versus Board of Education. So when the schools are desegregated by the Supreme Court, a lot of cities delay. Baltimore actually moves fairly swiftly. It starts doing a little bit in 1953, and then when the Supreme Court passes the decision in 54, Baltimore begins to do it more in earnest that fall, because the decision was handed down in May or June. So by September, Baltimore City Public Schools was beginning to desegregate. And what happened is that many white parents did not want to send their children to schools with black students. So they began to leave the city. And that's where white flight really originates, really takes off. So in my book, I call it white desegregation resistance and flight. It's not just, ooh, we leaving. It's we don't want to participate in desegregation. So they were leaving the city so that they wouldn't have to have integrated schools. So that's how white flight, I think, really operates. Of course, in the 60s, as more black people move in, as the Holy Week uprising and other uprisings take place during the 60s, oftentimes in response to highways being built through black communities, police violence like it is still today. So you had like a lot of uprising, and then of course the assassination of Dr. King on April the 4th, 1968, the Holy Week uprising. So 150 cities or more were about to be burnt down. Well, a lot of them were after the assassination of Dr. King. So that also, a lot of whites left cities after that as well. So from Brown versus Board to the Holy Week uprisings, a lot of whites left urban areas all across America. And when they left, in Maryland, we have per pupil funding for our schools. So that means the more students you have in your district, the more money your school gets. So when you have more white people leaving the city, well, the money for your schools is following them out to the counties. So Baltimore City Public Schools begins to be defunded. And I think that's we just had the 2020 census. Baltimore is still losing population. Used to have 1 million or so. Today we're at about 500. The census just came out and said we have 585,000. So we've lost almost half of Baltimore's population. So you can imagine how much money has been lost to our schools based on that per pupil funding formula.
Speaks to a question of equity, Dr. Brown, which is the new phrase that picks across this nation in almost any societal setting that you want to apply it to. We hear a lot of the wonderful parents, most and all of them really, the wonderful parents and advocates for their own children and other children, indeed are seeking a true sense of equity, not just in word. What are some of the solutions you see to help people attain that for their children? I mean, you're talking about something, it's an amazing dichotomy. Or maybe it's a paradox. You're talking about it in the past, and it continues almost to work in the almost very same fashion today.
Yeah, let me, I think, paint the picture a little bit more to get to those solutions, because this was a map of Baltimore in 2010, the last census, and it's a racial dot map. It was created by Dustin Cable, who was at the University of Virginia at the time. Green dots represent black people, blue dots represent white folks, red dots represent Asian folks, and orange represents Latino, Latina, Hispanic, Latinx folks. And so you can see this clear, deep racial segregation in Baltimore. And I looked at this in 2015, And the green dots, which represent black people, I said, hey, that looks like a butterfly. So I started calling it the black butterfly. And I was thinking about Kendrick Lamar in his album, To Pimp a Butterfly. I was thinking about how something as beautiful as a butterfly can be exploited. And so what in looking at that, the patterns I saw, the white L, the black butterfly, the Asian archipelago, and the Latina lagoon. So and then there's a small Native American Lumbee community in Upper Fells Point. So there is hyper segregated, and Baltimore's not just hyper segregated, it's a category 5 hyper segregated city. So like a hurricane, category 5 is the worst. So and there are 8 of these cities, 8 cities that are category 5 cities. And we know these cities, we hear about them all the time. Chicago, Detroit, Flint, Baltimore, as we know, Birmingham, Cleveland, Milwaukee, and St. Louis. So these are the 8 category 5 hyper-segregated cities. And if you look at homicide data from like 2017, per capita, St. Louis was number 1, Baltimore was number 2, Memphis was number 3, Chicago was number 4, and Detroit was number 5. So 4 out of the 5 cities are category 5 hyper-segregated cities. So when you say, like you said, it's not just these dynamics that I'm discussing are way back in the past. It's like, no, they help explain the present. They help explain why there's so much violence in Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit. It helps explain why you have certain health outcomes that are very poor in many Black neighborhoods. It's this hyper segregation, which again results in the hyper allocation of resources in white communities and the hyper deprivation of resources in Black communities.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go to, I'm sorry, Brother Tyrone. You did not put up the finger, so maybe I should just roll on to my next question. I think that's what I'm going to do. But Dr. Brown, getting to that, and it's, it's really a poetic way that you came to the title of your book and your research. And you could see it as you laid it out for us on the map. And even your statement of how can you, and I love Kendrick's album. I don't know if you spoke to Brother Kendrick about the title of your book, taking a little bit from the inspiration from his album, but as he postulated on his album, and as you're postulating your book, what are some of the solutions? And right now, I guess I'm kind of torn because I look at the solution as our people, of course, have to do what we can do within our community to work to better these things. Mm-hmm. But also primarily, what can we do for that can put some kind of onus on the government? Those that say, we take care of you, you are our citizenry, we collect taxes from you, what can be done? How do we get past where we are?
It's definitely, there's no silver bullet. Like, we start right there. There's no silver bullet. It's going to take a whole lot because a lot of damage has been inflicted. And I think, it's not just segregation, which results in segronomics, as Dr. Naliwe Rooks talks about in her book, Cutting School. It's also the fact that Black neighborhoods are defunded and destroyed. Like I said, they're uprooted left and right. I mean, we were uprooted when we were taken out of Africa. That's being uprooted and snatched from our homeland. Then when we got to America, we're being uprooted from the Chesapeake region and shipped off to the Deep South when cotton becomes king after 1800. The second slave trade, the domestic American slave trade, and Frederick Douglass talks about this in What to the Slave is 4th of July. He's hearing Black people in Baltimore being taken to the Inner Harbor and then shipped to New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama. So we were uprooted then. Then after the Civil War, there's more uprooting taking place because of white supremacist violence, like in Tulsa. We just mourned the 100th commemoration of Black Wall Street's destruction in 1921. So Black wealthy black community, obliterated. Rosewood, 1923, obliterated. Sweet Auburn Avenue during the Atlanta race riots, 1906, obliterated. Springfield, Illinois. In Memphis, you had three brothers that owned a grocery store, People's Grocery Store. They were lynched in 1892, kicked off the career of Ida B. Wells, obliterated. So black neighborhoods being destroyed and black neighborhoods being uprooted, like EBDI, highways being built through black neighborhoods, urban renewal, destruction of public housing, dispersing black people all over the place. Black people have been uprooted and displaced over and over again. So if we're talking about solutions are going to have to deal with all of that. Solutions are going to have to deal with, how do we make sure black communities are stable so that black communities, we need the capital to develop, but when we get the capital coming into black communities, we don't need it displacing black folks. So we need development without displacement. We need the undoing of segronomics. So we need the reparations, as I say in my book, black neighborhood reparations. So it's a lot of, I think the way we think about reparations is to individual black people. As I show in my book, black neighborhoods are defunded and destroyed. So black neighborhoods, and if you wonder, well, how are black neighborhoods defunded and destroyed, Dr. Brown? Redlining, subpriming, these sort of pawn shops, payday lending, cash stores instead of traditional banks. And then when those traditional banks are in our neighborhoods, they subprime, offering high interest rates to black home buyers and black business owners. So redlining and subpriming, that's the catch-1-2. That's the 1-2 punch that black communities always have to worry about when it comes to capital and financing. So all of that has to be addressed. All of that has to be undone, because that is what is needed to help facilitate the healing of black neighborhoods. There's a lot of stuff we can do without capital, but there's a whole lot of things that we really need capital for to move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Do you see, and put you on the spot here, do you see in your research, in your knowledge of history, do you see a tangible example of where black people, a black community, even within the ones that you mentioned, dealt with these issues, found a way to make their way out of it to create something? Is there a near modern example of that you can say, hey, look, this is what they're doing here, this is how they did it here? It has to be, like you said, has to be a multi-pronged approach. It's a multi-pronged, multi-layered problem. Is there any bastion of a golden black community, as it were, that Baltimore City residents and people can start looking toward as a model?
I think there are pockets. America destroys black neighborhoods. So I don't know that there's a good example of a pristine example of a black neighborhood that was just left alone so that it could thrive. I mean, that's what lynchings, as Ida B. Wells talks about, lynchings were actually, that was their purpose. It wasn't just to kill black people randomly. It was often to undermine black economic empowerment. So that's why you had the lynching of black farmers in Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. That's why you had, destruction of Black Wall Street, in 1921, destroying black economic potential. So I don't know, urban renewal and highways being built through successful black communities, in Birmingham, in 95, up and down the East Coast, I-10. These neighborhoods destroyed successful, thriving black communities. Haytide in Durham, North Carolina, urban renewal messed that up along with a state highway. So I don't know that there's like this, those kind of examples that we can look to, but I do think there are, examples of maybe states and cities doing certain things to begin to make amends. And we can take heart and take heed from like the work, the social equity, the social impact bonds that they're using in Denver to address homelessness, racial equity efforts in Portland to bring back black people that they had displaced in the Albania community there. the reparations that was passed by the city of Evanston in Illinois to deal with, I believe, the redlining and the subpriming, some of the banking issues there. So there are, I think, well, Chicago also had a reparations program based on the police violence. They had a torture site there, the Holman Square, where the police were holding people hostage and everything. And then the activists there pushed for reparations based on what the police did. So I think, putting a lot of these things together, the last thing I'll share is this, what I came up with, what I call a $3 billion racial equity social impact bond for Baltimore. And on the right side of this, you can see about half of it is just getting rid of toxic lead, getting toxic lead out of the community, because that's messing up the brains of our babies, of our toddlers, and it's messing with their academic achievement, and then it's messing up our in terms of like their ability to regulate their emotions. So now you're talking about more aggression, more violence in our communities. So half of it's just getting rid of that. Then we got $500 million for permanent housing for people without homes. We got $100 million for violence prevention to take safe streets from about 10 sites to 25 to 30 sites. We need more violence prevention. Money for substance abuse treatment, social work, counseling on the left side, eliminating transit, biking, food apartheid in Black butterfly neighborhoods. So for me, the racial equity social impact bond is one concrete way to facilitate healing for Black neighborhoods in Baltimore City.
So, to jump in now and kind of go, I think you done hit some points now that got our people geared up and everything. So thank you all again. Look, I know y'all see my head turning. Finally got my space set up, so I'm at a device here, I got a device here, and I got a device here. And this is how I'm maneuvering and doing my thing. But so a couple of things. First of all, thank you. And folks have thanked you for being here. You definitely got a lot of people thanking you for the nuggets, is what we call when you get information. We'll say nuggets. Thank you for nuggets. Kim Wiggins, say hi, Dr. Brown. Always a pleasure to listen to you. So
hey, Kim.
Definitely people who are familiar with you. Also, we have people talking about saying gentrification doesn't help Christina Flowers. Hey, Tyrone and Lawrence. How do y'all feel about the lawsuit of Baltimore City Public Schools? So that's one thing, and I want to also kind of shift this to education standpoint, because that's what we are, and that's what our parents have come to. As you speak about equity and speak about this plan, how do we begin or create equity within education? I will say the plan is good. I don't know if there's future aspirations for public office from you or not. I mean, that's exactly what it looks like. I'm just saying. There needs to be a lesson for our politicians and our people who are in place here. So y'all that's out there, let's figure out how we can get them all to book this Black Butterfly. I hope we got into some other thinking, but I'll give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I do talk about in the book the education system quite a bit. I mentioned earlier the per pupil funding formula that punishes Baltimore City, because if we're losing population, that means we keep losing funding. So I think we need to go to a per school funding formula. And then on top of that, Baltimore has had a huge capital budget deficit. We have about $3 billion in our public schools of capital needs that need to be fixed. That's why you see our children on the news freezing in the winter, being shut down in the summer because the AC ain't working. These are capital budget needs. And, we've had 26, 28 new schools built, probably need another 50, 75 new schools built. That costs capital budget money. So we're not talking about millions, we're talking about billions. So that's what we're saying. We need billions for our capital infrastructure, the buildings, the facilities, the heat, the AC. So that's one bucket, capital budget. Now, on the operating budget side, we're talking about we need more money, especially for schools in red line Black neighborhoods. And I'm going to show that map briefly. So here's Baltimore's residential security map. And a lot of people call this the redlining map, but there's 4 colors on this map: yellow, blue, green, and red. So these red colored communities and the yellow colored communities. These are the ones that were denied capital. So for the schools in these neighborhoods, these are the schools that need what I call a racial equity block grant. So on top of a per school funding formula, a racial equity block grant, so that these schools that are in those neighborhoods, they get up to $10 million extra every year to set up a real robust community school model, set up real supports for children, real supports for children who've been impacted by toxic lead exposure, children who've been exposed to trauma, and really bringing them the nutritional supports, the behavioral supports, the therapy supports that they need to really get to a position where they can grow and thrive. So the racial equity block grant, that would be based on, percentage of children in the school that were poisoned by lead, percentage of children in school impacted by trauma, percentage of children in extreme poverty, those type of things. So the more children you have with greater need, then the more money they should get through this racial equity block grant. Mm-hmm. So these are the types of things that I talk about for Baltimore City public school system on the operating budget side, more to have more and better resources for our children in Baltimore City schools, especially in yellow and red line communities. The other thing, the other bucket I think is, we need curriculum that's going to be culturally relevant for our children. And we got to make sure, we've had a mass reduction of Black teachers. Since 2005, Baltimore City teacher schools were about 63% Black. And by 10 years later, it was around 36% Black. So we had a massive reduction in the percentage of Black teachers. We got to address that racial equity issue. We've had about 90 or more public schools closed since 2000. Many of those closed in the Black butterfly. So there needs to be healing from that. There needs to be healing from schools that are closed, because when you close a school, you're not just closing a school, you're closing, that could be a food pantry, could be a community resource site, a community center for the community. It could be a place where people go and vote, a polling site. Hello, we'd be concerned about voting, but then we close in the places where people go and vote. So polling site, places where people get their first steps in knowing how to govern when they're a part of the PTA, PTO. So when you take that away, now you're taking away people's democratic, their sort of trial run. You talk about running for office. That's where people begin to get their legs under them, is that at the small level. Don't just jump out and run for city council. They often start with small stuff like PTA, PTO. Mm-hmm. So closing Black schools in Black neighborhoods, for me, that is a huge issue that Baltimore City, Black schools matter, basically. Black teachers matter, Black students matter, Black schools matter. So these are all things I think we have to look at if we're talking about equity for real in Baltimore City public schools.
Are you familiar, excuse me, are you familiar with the lawsuit that's come up? Because someone asked about that, and Christine, I will let our guests, speak to this question. I know you asked for my thoughts on it as well. Just because I can talk a lot and about that in particular. So reach out to me, call me as soon as we get off air, and we can have a discussion about that, because I also want to ask you about some other stuff, but I'll let our guest give his opinion on the lawsuit.
Yeah, I know there was almost a running lawsuit started in 96, I believe, where you had, I think Black parents talking about, it was the Bradford case. I think the ACLU argued it, in the Maryland ACLU, and they argued that Baltimore City schools, predominantly Black school district, was deeply underfunded. So that set about the Thornton sort of legislature looking at bringing more funding to Baltimore City public schools. And then lately we've had the Kerwin Commission, which is in the Maryland General Assembly, looking at funding, which was passed via veto override by the Democrats in the Maryland General Assembly earlier this year. But I think there may have been like a new filing saying, hey, Baltimore City schools are still underfunded. So if I'm not mistaken, that the filing that maybe is newer is probably still related to the original filing alleging that the state of Maryland has deeply underfunded Baltimore City public schools.
Got you. And I'm waiting for a response back because I don't want to jump ahead of our people. There were also threats about filing some type of lawsuit against the CEO if she did not resign. So I want to catch and see if that's what it's about. But however, I love earlier how you said development without displacement. It's a point someone made. Also, according to the district numbers, we have 47% Black teachers today. However, and it's gone up, but it still doesn't match our student body yet. So there's still plenty of work that needs to be done there. And Ms. Patterson says, schools are the hub, absolutely. And every closure can be detrimental to surrounding communities, without a doubt. I mean, I think we've witnessed that and we're continuing to witness that. We're actually seeing a big issue with that now right here where I'm at, because they did close Alexander Hamilton, which is in West Baltimore. And that has been very weird. I've been hearing from people and my mom and this thing now, because school starts in less than 10 days now, and they are still a few parents that don't even know what school their kids are assigned to from that school. So that's info. William, I will give it back to you. Thank you again, Dr. Brown, for being here. But if you have something else, William, if not, William, like, no, go ahead. You done came in and took over. And took it. I can go in though with one other thing while we wait as other folks come in, because this is something that we don't.
Now, what you saw was surprise, Dr. Brown. Normally, when the audience gets to going and they start asking these questions, I was almost going to say, "All right, Dr. Brown, I see you. Nice meeting you," because that's usually the last word for me.
It stops. It does. Hold on, the curriculum is absolutely. And it does normally go, but a lot of them is like repeat questions, and then some other stuff that we could send to Dr. Brown, like personally. I just, because of the platform and with which we are, and just being very careful about stuff, because we are an organization. And I don't know if there are aspirations or future plans of some type of political space, but people are feeling like it. They love that, but not feeling like that's what you are. They feel like he possessed what's needed to be there. You know what I'm saying? With the knowledge and the information that's come up with all these maps and everything that's going on. So I don't want it to become where support Dr. Brown type of thing in this case with that. But but the information is definitely good. So with that being said, though, from the information and being there, so you in a position, or if you could get in front of our current mayor and current city council members, right? Because as you stated earlier, that's when Baltimore was kind of like the beginning phase of this. If you could get in front of them and, in this day and time, seeing how things are steadily going, and steadily decreasing for us, and within this butterfly, like, what would what would you say to them, or so what could you encourage others to say to them to kind of get them to understand all of this history and then implement something that would now work to benefit us?
That's a great question. I think I think it is incumbent on residents of Baltimore City to make sure that our elected officials are informed of history. If I had a chance, I think I would have them in a workshop, which would have several different sessions, because it's hard to put everything in one, presentation, which is also why I wrote the book as well. So I think, whether it's my book or other material, our elected officials should be well versed in Baltimore City's racial history to understand why things are the way they are, which is quite simply the black butterfly has been starved of resources, while the white L has been flush with all kinds of capital and opportunities. So, equity demands making black neighborhoods matter. And we can't make Black lives matter if we don't make black neighborhoods matter, because that's where black people live. So you can't make Black lives matter unless you make black neighborhoods matter. And I think if I had to drill it down to one statement that I repeat over and over, if I only had 2 minutes, that's what I would say. So I think that's the message we want to essentially get across. Mayor, city council, what are you doing to really make Black neighborhoods matter? And I'm not talking about small scale stuff, because the damage was done at a huge level. So we can't come in with small itty bitty solutions. If the problems are big, the solutions have to be big. And I think that's the general framework I would offer.
Cool beans. Thank you for that. And before we come to you, William, no, seriously, thank you. No, we again just want to thank you for coming. You look, you're getting love. Like, if you not lack love, I want to make that known. People are sending you hearts and nuggets at the nuggets. I think when William announced to us that these are one of them days that we're in school and learning, I think our family is familiar, with these type of guests. And it was like, let me get my notepad and my pen together and take information, you know what I'm saying? And that's what a lot of people have gotten information in this saying that. So thank you all for this. Rebecca have also posted some slides for you all there. So definitely click on them and follow. Thank you again for coming out this evening, Mr. Lawrence Brown. Folks are saying and everything like that. I don't know if you have already, but I will ask if you can let folks know how they can get your book. Put that information out there for us. I'm going to fall back. I'll see y'all Thursday at Tyrone's house. And yeah, thank you again, Dr. But please give us the information how we can get your book.
Yeah, I encourage people to buy my book at Baltimore's local bookstores. That's really where I encourage folks to go. So you got Red Emma's, you got the Ivy Bookshop, Charm City Books, but Black-owned bookstores, we're talking about my good friend, Sister Tia, over at Urban Reads Bookstore, 3008 Greenmount Avenue. And then over west, we got Everyone's Place. So those are the places. All of our local bookstores, but our Black bookstores need your love and support. So definitely check out Everyone's Place over west and our sister Urban Reads bookstore over east.
Well, Dr. Brown, thank you so much. Truly, it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. And yes, just like all of our family members that were quiet in the beginning, it is because I've been taking notes after notes after notes on what you are saying. Family, once again, thank you so much for your questions and input to Dr. Brown, as we can certainly glean so much from his scholarship, research, honesty, candor, and bravery to speak truth to power with, again, what I would say is a seminal work that will be in the pantheon of liberation literature for our people for years to come. Thank you all so much. Join us on Thursday at Brother Tyrone's house. Dr. Brown, if you're free at 6 o'clock on Thursday, come on by virtually to Tyrone's house. We'd love to have you. He is the host. I am merely a panelist. But thank you all, family, so much. Take care of yourself. And I will just leave the mic open for Dr. Brown. Any final thoughts that you have, sir?
Check out my website, theblackbutterflyproject.com, theblackbutterflyproject.com, because it's a complement to the book. I put a lot of the newspaper articles, maps, charts, stuff that you won't, the book is pretty much the narrative. So I give you the visuals on my website. So I just encourage folks to check out theblackbutterflyproject.com. And thank you all for the invitation. It's been a great discussion. And I'm always excited when people are serious about learning what we need to do in Baltimore to make Black neighborhoods matter.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Said so wonderfully. Family, we will see you on Thursday and next Monday, as this is the last of our summer series. School is back. We're all back. So family, take good care of yourself and one another as well. Peace to everyone.